Next step is probably getting the crank bolt back out, put the pulley back in. Before I call it a night, I installed the crank angle sensor, which goes in just as it is right now. When you put it in, the first few times you try it, you're most likely going to have it not go in all the way. It'll be like out there, and it won't want to go any further. That means that it's not aligned right. Just rotate the shaft on the sensor, or just twist this back and forth, try putting it back in again, and it should sit flush, or almost flush. There's a little bit, maybe a millimeter gap there, but it should become almost flush with this surface here. So now that I've put the bolts in, I put them in finger tight, I've realized that this can rotate with the bolts in place, which is either a really clever way of adjusting the ignition timing, or it seems like an oversight by the designers of the engine, since you really shouldn't be able to install this thing wrong. So what I'm just going to do, I don't know if you can see, but there's little marks, little circles where it used to be tightened down. I'm going to line those, and I'm going to tighten it that way. Hopefully that will be the correct angle for this sensor to be attached to the cam. Maybe it's just not that sensitive, I don't know. But I'm going to tighten it down where those little marks are and hope for the best. We won't know until we actually start the engine. So there, now the crank angle position sensor is installed, and there's one last step that I want to do before I sign off for tonight. If you got an OEM timing belt, you'll have one of these stickers. Write down your mileage on it and attach it to there. This is an important and overlooked step. You've got one of these stickers if you've got a Nissan OEM timing belt. If not, just go ahead and use a label maker. I'm probably going to anyway, just in case my handwriting comes off. But write down the mileage, that way you know when your timing belt was last replaced. And now there can be no question. Alright, so it's day 3, and we're going to start by installing the water inlet and outlet to the engine, which are right over here. Alright, so we installed the inlet and outlet again. We put this plastic cover back on, and we went ahead and routed these electrical cables, which they have clips on the front of the timing belt, plugged in the temperature sensors, and screwed that back down over there. We'll be able to push this out of the way when we install the radiator hoses. So before we can do anything else, we have to do the pulley, and to do the pulley we have to take out the crankshaft pulley bolt, which we were using before to turn the engine over. So I'm going to go ahead and put the car in 5th gear and take the bolt out. Alright, so we installed the pulley, we installed the key, and we installed the crankshaft pulley bolt. And now everything's in there just to make sure it's all still working fine. We went ahead and put the car back in neutral, and we're going to just turn the engine over a little bit. It's relatively easy to turn.
Seems pretty good.
Alright, good. Okay, so we've got the pulley in, and now we're going to do the accessory drive belts. The first one is alternator and fan belts. If you bought new belts, then the belt you're looking for is 400K4. That's the correct belt for the alternator and fan. They're all off by a couple inches depending on the application. So once you get the belt on here, you need to reattach the tensioning arm with that bolt out there that you removed before, so you could get the bolts for the timing cover. Once that's on, you make sure that the bolt back behind this thing is loose enough. Loosen this until you can slip the belt on it, and then you start tightening it. Now that one up there, you don't want to make it tight until you're completely done with the tensioning process. There are several methods for determining how tight it's supposed to be. I just sort of go by feel, and then if I start the car up and it starts squealing, I know that it's not tight enough. And once you're at the right tension, you tighten up the bolt behind the tensioner, and you tighten up the bolt on the top that holds on the alternator. Alright, so now that the alternator belt is on, we're going to put on the air conditioning belt. This is the tensioner. You just push this up into position and then tighten that nut on the end there. And that will hold it in the non-tension position so you can get the belt on. You just release that nut, and it'll lower down you can lower down in position and then tighten the nut down here at the bottom. That'll put tension on it, and when you're all done, you tighten that nut up again. And the air conditioning belt is 382K4 if you're replacing your belts. So this is just a little overview of the tensioning system on the power steering pulley. So right here, this is the bolt you use to tension the power steering. This is the whole tensioning apparatus. You tighten this once it's at the correct tension. These two, it's a good idea both when you're taking it off and when you're tensioning it to loosen these two bolts. Without it, this tensioning apparatus doesn't work so well, but once it's all tensioned, you want to tighten this, this, and this. But all three of these should be somewhat loose while you're using the threaded screw mechanism. Alright, so at the top of the power steering pulley, you can see that bolt that looks loose in there. So that bolt just needs to be loosened. That's what holds the power steering belt on. There are two other bolts which we removed previously that help to adjust the tension. There's one hole right there, and there's also through here another hole in there. So you can kind of see that. There are holes here in the power steering pulley so that you can get at those holes or those bolts. So make sure that the power steering pulley is turned to the correct orientation so you can get a wrench through there to attach the bolts. We're not going to put those in until after we've got the correct tension on the power steering belt. Alright, so update on the tensioner for the power steering pump. The bolts that you access through here and through here, they can't go in when the tensioner is, when the belt is tensioned. They're actually part of the tensioning system, and they're supposed to be in there, but loose when you're doing the tensioning, and then you tighten them up when you're done. So I'm going to have to go ahead and untension this belt again to get those bolts in place. Alright, so we got all the accessory belts on and tensioned. So the next step is going to be the fan. Alright, so now the fan is installed. Before we drop the radiator in, we're going to go ahead and attach the radiator hoses onto the inlet and outlet. Alright, Chris. Let's lower our radiator cover. Or right that fan strap. Whoops. Yeah, it's going to pee a little bit. Alright. It is surprisingly light.
Well done.
Just a matter of bringing this down and onto those little pins down there. I might have to go below. Okay.
It's in! Success!
So we were able to get the radiator in now. All the hoses are hooked up. Don't forget the drain cock at the end needs to be tightened, or else when you put water in, it's just come right back out. While they're working on filling up the radiator, I'm going to work on putting in the new spark plugs. So once the radiator was installed and the spark plugs were installed as well, we hooked everything up and we gave the engine a try. And it did start, but the idle wasn't staying very steady. It was idling quite quickly, and there was a really extreme hissing or whistling kind of squealing sound. So we assumed that it was the belts, and we went in and started tightening the belts. We tried this a couple more times, and as you will hear in the next clip, this whistling sound was still happening.
Honestly, it sounds like it's coming from over here.
Oh, did you plug in the vacuum? Yeah, you did. Yes, it's right here. I can feel it. Alright, so it's been making really bad noises because this was put underneath instead of on top. At least that's what our theory is. We're going to switch that around, hopefully, because we could feel air leaking into the balance tube through here, which means it's getting extra air in. The computer's wondering why it can't control its idle because it can't reduce the airflow into the cylinders.
Start the engine.
They're the same type, but it was a slightly different model. hotter, colder. Awesome to me. This was kind of a help, a little bit, slightly.
It's a thing.
It's
It
good.
has diagram.
It has some diagrams. You know, when it just says in one step, remove all the accessory belts, the radiator, and the fan, and you go, how?
Yeah, step one, take the engine apart.
Yeah, step one, disassemble the car.
Yeah. Oh, and I get my garage back.
Yeah.